Before we get started with the episode, I have two requests. Please download the Talk Music Talk app. It is free for iPhone and Android. It is available wherever you like to get your apps, or you can subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or Google Play. Once you do, leave a rating and or review in the store to help spread the word about the podcast. Second request, I am in the process of acquiring advertisers and sponsors, and I could use your help by filling out a quick survey at talkmusictalk.com. Just click on the survey link. Should take you 30 seconds or less, and it would be greatly appreciated. And now for today's show. Hello there. Welcome to another episode of Talk Music Talk with Boyce. I am Boyce. This is my podcast. Thank you for listening. If this is your first time listening to the podcast, Talk Music Talk is a weekly music interview podcast where I have long-form discussions with people who are connected to music from all different genres, all different backgrounds. Music therapists, music journalists, singers, and songwriters. And on episode 101, I had the pleasure of speaking to jazz saxophonist Donny McCaslin. He is a band leader of the group that WNYC called David Bowie's Last Band. Donny's group played on Bowie's final album, Blackstar, which came out on January 8th. And just a few days later, Bowie passed. They have a new album coming out on October 14th, which is called Beyond Now, and it was inspired by and is dedicated to Bowie. In the conversation, we talk about the making of the album, plus what it was like working with Bowie on Blackstar. Before the whole Bowie experience, Donny has released 11 studio albums as a band leader, so we talk about some of those projects. He is originally from Santa Cruz, California, started playing sax at 12. His dad is a musician. He played in his band. He had great exposure to accomplished musicians, and we talk about how these experiences shaped him as a musician and artist that he is today. Talked about so much more, about his switch from acoustic to electric music, how he keeps growing as an artist, and also some of his favorite Bowie songs and albums. After the conversation, you will hear the title track from Beyond Now, one of my favorite songs from the project, right after the conversation. And just as a side note, recorded this in Donny's home, and there is some airplane sounds throughout the conversation. Does not take away from a great talk, so you will enjoy it. Here it is, without further ado, my conversation with Donny McCaslin on Talk Music Talk. Enjoy. When I saw you perform at the Village Vanguard in January, earlier this year, you know, the snowstorm, right?
Yes.
I'm sitting next to James Bader and had no idea, until after the show. I'm sitting there talking to him, and, you know, he was raving about the show also. And I'm wondering, why is everyone staring? And because I didn't recognize who it was at first, because he had his hat pulled down low. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's who it is. So did you get a chance to talk to him?
I did. I think he might have come more than one night.
Oh, really? Okay.
Actually. So yeah, I got to talk to him a bit. And, I remember him from the first movie that I think brought him into focus, which was Sex, Lies, and Videotape.
Okay, years ago.
I remember him from that. And I came to understand that he frequents the Village.
Yeah, that's what he said.
Which is really cool. Really cool, so.
Yeah, he's like, you can find me here, regularly.
Yeah.
I'm a fan of his from Pretty in Pink.
Oh, he was in Pretty in Pink?
Yes, he was the villain. I think he's always the villain, right?
He certainly is now in Blacklist.
Yes, I love Blacklist. So that night, and Nate Wood, that's how I found out about the show. How long you been working with Nate Wood, who I've interviewed? Plays bass. Sit-in bass occasionally for you, right? Yeah,
so I'm trying to recount when I met Nate. And I'm sort of blanking, but it's been some years now.
Okay.
And he's just an incredible musician.
Yeah.
And it's just been such a joy to, I guess when I first got to know him, he was subbing on this band on drums, subbing for Mark. And then I started to hear about his bass prowess, and then started to hear about his guitar playing, and then started to hear about his songwriting, and got his records, which are wonderful, and then found out about his mixing abilities, recording abilities, and mastering abilities, and I'm just awed at what a complete musician he is, and it's really such a joy to work with him. So he, in terms of the evolution of this group, a few years ago, Tim LaFave started playing with the Tedeschi Trucks Band. Okay. So it took him out of circulation for something like 10 months of the year, which is a lot these days, So I've needed subs on bass, of course, and so Nate has been doing that a lot lately, and it's just tremendous because he just so understands the music and the concept of the group, and he just fits right in whether he's playing bass or drums. I mean, in August, we were down in Sao Paulo for a couple nights, and he played drums. Oh, right. Tim was on bass with Jason, and then fast forward to about a week later, and then it was Mark on drums, Nate on bass, and with Jason. That's crazy. And then we just did California with that same lineup. So it's just amazing how he does that. And again, he's mixed and mastered the last couple records, and the depth of he's a big part of this project. Just the depth of his musicality and the way it's manifested itself sonically has been tremendous.
What is that conversation like when you're for the mixing and mastering?
I mean, David Binney is also deeply involved. I mean, David has produced most of my records, and it felt like when we made the change into electric music and electronica music, it was even more in David Binney's wheelhouse. And he was the one who suggested that I do an electric record. As prior to that, it had just all been different sort of acoustic projects. He said, "Man, you should really do an electric record," and that ended up being Perpetual Motion, which was Tim on bass and Mark on half the record, Antonio Sanchez on the other half of the record, Adam Benjamin from Kneebody, Uri Kane, Dave played a little bit on it. So Dave, I was generally aware of electronica music, listen to some Square Pusher, a couple other things, but Dave Binney really fed me a lot of stuff, would send me stuff to check out, Skrillex and, different things. And then also being on the road with Tim and Mark initially, and just kind of checking out what they were listening to and talking about it, was really, was great. And eventually Jason joined the group, and I was a fan of Now versus Now. So back to your question, what does that conversation look like? In a way, what I feel like is that I trust all these guys and I trust their instincts. So there's not a lot of specific conversation initially. I mean, David Binney and I do have a lot of specific conversation. But, for example, once we've done the basic tracking for the record, Dave takes the files home and he just works on them. And, we might talk about general things, but he just does his thing. Okay. And then he sends it to me, and then we talk about it. And it's the same approach with Nate. So let's say we've Dave has worked on the post-production and got it ready for mixing. Then, we've talked and everything, we're all on the same page, and we send it to Nate, and I don't think we say much initially. Okay. We just let Nate do his thing. And then they'll be back and forth, and we hear it, okay, we'll say specific things like, can the, bass drum here or whatever. But, also Nate's instincts are so great. I mean, especially with this, with Beyond Now, it was very seamless. He would send back the mix and it was like, sounds great. Yeah. I mean, maybe a couple things here and there on a couple tunes, but it was just really, it was really great. And so I feel like one thing that's been great for me is to be surrounded by these musicians and be able to get these people involved that are so wonderful. And I just want I want them to do what they do. And it's just like when we play, I'll maybe ask for specific things here and there, like with a voicing or, a concept thing or whatever. But in a way, I just want everybody to do what they do. And that's the joy of it, is just when we're all playing together, and I know everybody feels the trust that I have in them, and we're just playing and having a good time, and we're interacting, and there's a conversational thing, and I don't have to be the one that's dictating what happens. Yeah. Because I love and I trust these guys so much and what they do with the music. And one of the joys for me is just seeing where it goes in ways that I hadn't planned. Okay. Yeah, and it manifests itself, and it's like that with Benny, that he'll add some vocal thing on it that I never would have thought of. And I was like, man, it sounds great. Or Nate will add something on the snare with the reverb. I'm like, man, it sounds great. So. And
that trust gives them the freedom to do what they want.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah. I hope so, because I try to make it that kind of environment to work in, and that's something that it was relates to the experience of making Blackstar with David Bowie. It was that kind of environment where he was very open to our ideas. He encouraged us to try things. He encouraged us to go for whatever we were hearing. And there was the framework of his music. Yeah. And we started with the demos that he sent, and that was, of course, our starting point. But it was wonderful to work in such a engaging, collaborative atmosphere. So that's the kind of atmosphere I try to have in my group as well.
How close were the demos to what he was looking for, what you were able to give him?
Well, in terms of the song forms, it's pretty close. There could be a couple differences on some tunes, but for the most part, the actual form is in place in the demo version. Some demos had lyrics, some had no lyrics at all, some had just kind of him singing a melody. So all that stuff was processed, different timing for different tunes on his end, and then. There's a song called Dollar Days on the record, which was one that he just picked up the guitar in the studio and started playing. There was no demo for that.
Oh, really? Okay. That's my favorite song on it.
It's unbelievable. Yeah. And it was interesting when I first was interviewed about the record. It was before I had heard it. And so they mentioned the title, which I didn't know. And some of the titles had changed. Yeah. But I was like, can you describe the song? Like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And then I think until I heard it, and I was like, oh, right. Yeah. I had forgotten about that because it just sort of happened within a few hours of one day out of many days of recording. So I had just completely forgotten about it, but it's so beautiful, that song. But Sue was another example of a song that the original version was the version with Maria Schneider. Okay. And then the conversation was about how do we make this different and what can we do? And we experimented with different forms and ended up going back to the form pretty close to Maria's form.
So you said you, in a previous interview, you recorded like twice as much that was released. Did you know like when the album came out what was going to be on there, or was that a surprise?
I didn't. Well, I guess I would say that I heard the album before it came out. I heard it about a month and a half before it came out. So at that point, I knew what was going on. But prior to that, I had no idea.
It was all, that was a nice surprise, I guess. Like, what album did he create?
Yeah, no, it was pretty pretty amazing and overwhelming to hear it for the first time after those months had elapsed, and then also hearing what David and Tony Visconti did to the tracks. The mix is so great, and just the subtle things with the orchestra. Just it was hearing these new layers of information, and the way it was presented sonically was really amazing.
Yeah. So I'm curious, with your could you have been able to do this project prior to doing the electronica music?
Oh,
like your own stuff. Like, would you have been ready to do that? Like, is there such a difference between your acoustic and electronica music?
Okay. Do you mean if this would have come up before?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's interesting. I mean, I never thought of that. And who knows? I mean, who knows if it would have even come up, if he would have even been attracted to that concept, I think, again, David Bowie he was the one who said, do some electric music. And then as I was mentioning earlier, the casting for Gravity, Fast Future were really in his wheelhouse production wise. And he did a lot of post-production sound stuff and, things. So I think that, and his concept and stuff about how the music would evolve was really, a key role in how it developed. It's hard to know if I mean, Bowie certainly loved acoustic music. I know he was a big fan of Maria Schneider's band and came to hear the band. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, what made you switch to the electronica? Were you looking for a new direction?
Well, I think I was looking for something new to do, and the Perpetual Motion record was my first step into it, and I guess thinking about that record, it makes me think about, some of those tunes were really influenced by some of my childhood memories and interactions with electric music. I grew up in Santa Cruz, California, and my father, being a musician, parents divorced, see my dad once a week and go to his gig during the day, and they play Great American Songbook stuff, swing, but then also Latin jazz and also funk R&B tunes. And so it was kind of a big, palette there. And then Santa Cruz at that time, Tower of Power was a big group. And so I would hear them play from time to time. And there's a lot of reggae groups who tour. A lot of the major reggae acts would have a tour stop in Santa Cruz. Okay. So growing up there, I saw Peter Tosh and Jimmy Cliff and the Mighty Diamonds and Black Uhuru and Burning Spear. So it was a pretty open environment. I played a salsa band as a teenager. Paul Jackson, the bass player from the Headhunters, lived in Santa Cruz for a while during my teenage years, and I was in his band for a while.
Oh, really?
In addition to my father's band. So I guess what I'm getting at is that, I was playing with Paul Jackson a bit, with my father's band a lot. Weather Report, Heavy Weather was a really popular album there. I love that record. I love that band. So electric music in general was something that I was into as a teenager, in addition to acoustic music and a lot of other things. And how it connects to Perpetual Motion is I think I drew on some of that in writing the songs. Memphis Redux was LZCM is inspired by Led Zeppelin and Christian McBride, and Energy Generation is kind of inspired by Tower of Power, and you've got that song of theirs, You've Got to Funkifies. When I started touring with Perpetual Motion, eventually it was with Tim and Mark, and I guess, prior to that, I would make one record of a certain concept and then move on to something else. Maybe Soar and In Pursuit are pretty in line with each other, both kind of drawing from folkloric rhythms of the Americas as a rhythmic basis for those records. But I think when I was touring with Perpetual Motion, I just was having so much fun. Yeah. And Jason joined the group, and I think the thing about electronica music was the sonic landscape that it provided was really attractive to me. I felt like I could hear something in there, and I was drawn to it, and I liked the intense rhythmic activity underneath it, if you will, or just in your face, or however it's mixed or whatever. But I liked that, and I felt like there was room there for me to explore. And I think sometimes for me, it's just this instinctual thing where I just get drawn to something and I just roll with it. And at this period of my life, it happened, and I just was having fun playing with those guys, and then just having fun discovering, Skrillex and Boards of Canada and Venetian Snares and Aphex Twin, and just kind of delving deep. And then pop groups that, like Imogen Heap, who's a songwriter, but also a strong electronic element, and just all that stuff. I just was really, really felt drawn to. Deadmau5, just really enjoy the sonic landscape. So I think that's what it is. And then so now there's been a succession of records in this direction, and it's just because I'm still enjoying it. And I feel like it challenges me on the instrument to come up with language that feels appropriate to me within that context. Okay. And that's been great to feel like, I need to dig deeper to find some new ways of expressing myself on the instrument, because I'm still playing an acoustic instrument, just like Mark. Half of us are just, we're just playing acoustic. So it's been really, really fun.
Yeah. So does your songwriting have to change in that you're thinking about what they're going to do to it after the fact?
I mean, I don't think I think about too much after the fact. I mean, a little bit, but mostly I think about, the language in the band and whatnot. I'm listening to certain things for inspiration, and then just trying to come up with what I think will be a good vehicle for us to play on.
Okay. And just kind of going back, when did you start playing sax?
Oh, I was 12 years old.
Okay.
Yeah, I was 12 years old and in junior high school, and my best friend at the time, Jeff Newman, was in beginning orchestra, and I was in a photography class or introduction to photography, and for whatever reason, I wasn't connecting in the classroom, and it was like the last day that you could switch classes. And so I just switched to beginning orchestra because I could tell I wasn't going to do well in photography. And I just switched because my friend was in that class. And then I told my father, and he said, "What instrument?" And I said saxophone. Yeah. And I think in retrospect, the reason was in my father's band, there had been a saxophone player whose name was Wesley Braxton, who was he was a hippie at that time. Yeah. He wore tie-dye shirts. He had a big beard, and he played these like wild solos. Uh-huh. Santa Cruz at that time, the main drag was the Pacific Garden Mall, this outdoor mall, and there was this old courthouse called the Cooper House that had been converted into shops, and there was a restaurant, and the bar, and this part of the restaurant was this outdoor seated area with a little bandstand, and just adjacent to that was the mall. So the scene was you'd have people sitting at these tables drinking and eating, and then you'd have people walking up and down the mall, stopping and standing and listening to the band. So it was a pretty colorful environment. Yeah. And Wesley would play these solos like on these vamps, like on a tune like Black Orpheus or something. They'd be playing like a one-chord vamp, and he'd just be squeaking and play, and it would kind of like whip the audience into a bit of a frenzy sometimes. And I think it was charismatic. Okay. I think I was drawn to that. And I remember looking one time into the bell of his saxophone, and there was this just like pool of condensation with a cigarette butt floating in the middle of it, which is like gross in retrospect. Yeah. But as a 12-year-old or whatever cool. I was like, wow, that's really cool. So I think it was that led me to the saxophone. It was like his charisma. And then straight away, my father got me lessons with the guy who was teaching in his band at that time, whose name is Brad Hecht, who's a great player, lives in Santa Cruz. Just saw him last time I was out there. So right away, I was in beginning orchestra in junior high with my buddy, but also getting lessons with Brad. And then Santa Cruz at that time, for the town of its size, it was very vibrant culturally, and especially in terms of jazz music. So my father was playing at the Cooper House 5 days a week, playing at a place called the 2525 nightclub 5-6 nights a week. So my dad was gigging, and the Kawumba Jazz Center had opened in 1976. So it's open by this time. And it was put together by, a group of folks from Santa Cruz who wanted to create a spot where international groups would come. Okay. So the way they started was, and still actually, Monday night is their main night for jazz. And the reason, I'm assuming, the reason they did this is because a band would play in San Francisco at the Keystone Corner from a Tuesday through Sunday. Okay. And Monday would be this off night. So they would come down to Santa Cruz and play Monday night. So that was in place by the time I was 12 years old and I started playing. And then I remember, my father taking me to see Elvin Jones as a 12-year-old, And then a couple weeks later, Sonny Fortune. And then later, Cedar Walton and Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers. And then the list goes on and on. Yeah. So that was a great thing to have access to, as you can imagine. And then my parents, I think I mentioned, my parents were divorced. Yeah. So I lived with my mother outside of Santa Cruz in an area called Happy Valley. But my father lived in Aptos, which is a few miles down the road. So as I was preparing to go to high school, I'm now maybe studying with another saxophone player whose name is Paul Contos, who's now the head of the Monterey Jazz Festival Next Generation All-Star Band. Wonderful saxophonist and educator. So I'm studying with Paul, and I'm hearing about Aptos High School and their excellent jazz band program. So to make a long story short, I used my father's address and start going to Aptos High as a freshman. And actually, I moved in with my father initially because there was something happening at home with my mom and a stepdad. They were separating or whatever. So I was living with my father initially and got dialed into this amazing jazz band program that at that time, public school, they had a great feeder junior high school. And then there was also a really strong community college program. Cabrillo College was the name of the school, and it was the two major teachers there at that time were Lyle Cruz and Ray Brown, the trumpet player. So the high school band I was in was led by Don Keller, a trumpet player who'd been in the Navy with Bill Berry. They were buddies, and Bill had, I don't remember the chronology of this. Bill had been in the Ellington band before the Navy or after. But basically, Bill had ended up in L.A. and had the L.A. big band, and they played some Ellington charts and other things. But he had given Don a copy of this immense book of Ellington charts, which at this time wasn't readily available for high schools or colleges. So at 14 years old, I'm in jazz band, and it's 5 days a week, and we're playing. Most days we're concentrating on Ellington music. It was unbelievable. Incredible. I mean, this small town, unbelievable. So, and then, the program had this tradition of excellence. So I get in, I have to audition. I'm a freshman. I make it into the band. But there are all these other guys who are older than me, who've been in the band for a couple of years, and they're all telling me about the Cabrillo Cabrillo program. So I auditioned there, and I don't think I made it my first or second year, but I eventually was able to get into that program. So that was an after school thing that happened a couple days a week. So, and then at the same time, Kawumba was offering combo classes and harmony classes. So from age 14 to 18, I had access to all this stuff, and it was just beautiful. Yeah. And then the other factor being having access to playing with my father's band sort of whenever I wanted to. He had all these gigs I'm talking about, and I had just had a green light to go sit in and whatnot. And then when I got to be about maybe 16 or so, I kind of maybe joined his band or something. And then I was there every weekend and playing a lot. So just like having the horn in my face a lot and playing all the time, it was really a great environment to grow up in musically. Yeah.
Were you thinking about you knew you were going to be a professional musician?
Definitely. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think initially I wanted to be a pro basketball player.
Okay. When did that end?
Pretty early. I don't think I made the team. I guess I made the team maybe once in high school, junior high, and I didn't play much. And as I was used to, the problem was growing up in Happy Valley, and my father was a college basketball player. So part of our ritual together when I would see him one day a week was we'd go out and play hoops or whatever the sport of the season was, but hoops in particular. But the problem was it was always just me and him and just shooting. Okay. I had no concept for the team game or really, how to really function, how the team game worked. So I didn't, I was on a couple teams. I was on a league team, and then I was on the junior high team, but I didn't play much. And then my freshman year, I think I went out for the freshman team. I can't even remember. Yeah. I think I did, but I didn't make it. And so it was, the painting was on the wall, or writing was on the wall, I guess is the expression. But I actually got much better as a basketball player as I got older. Once I started to understand, I was deeply into music, but I started to, watch more and then play a lot more pickup games. And then I kind of got it together. And then I played a lot in college. I went to school in music, but I played a lot of just pickup games and then continued to for many years. I love basketball.
Did you ever feel like you missed out?
I mean, Yeah, I mean, I think there's a tiny part of me that feels like, man, if I would have just understood, if somebody would have showed me like what to work on, I could have played so much more and would have, I know I would have loved it. However, things played out the way they did, and for better, and I was really focused on music. So who knows, if I would have gotten more involved in sports, I might not have had the same commitment to music. So I don't look back with any, I don't look back and feel bad about it, but it would have been nice to play a little bit more. But then again, music is really, an all-encompassing kind of thing.
Plus you can do music longer than basketball.
That's right. I mean, I'm 50 now, so my career would have been long over.
Unless you did the basketball and then switched over to back to
usually
music.
doesn't work that way. Usually doesn't work that way.
So you graduate from high school, and then what?
Yeah, then I went to I had accumulated enough scholarship money through festivals and whatnot to be able to pay for the first year of Berklee College of Music. That and some grant money from the government. So, because we really didn't have much by the way of means. But I was able to get to Berklee that first year, and then I qualified for a scholarship, and so it was Berklee College of Music for 4 years. And I think I had the opportunity, in fact, I did. I had the opportunity to leave. It might have been my sophomore or junior year to go out with Buddy Rich's band. Some friends of mine had already left school for that, but I knew that I just wasn't ready, and I didn't want to leave the school environment. I wanted to study more, so I stayed in school, and then I ended up getting the opportunity to join Gary Burton's band. Somewhere in my senior year, maybe about halfway through my senior year, I joined his band, and it was great to have that kind of opportunity. So, finished school, I stayed in Boston, and I was touring with Gary, and that lasted maybe 3.5 years, something like that. Got to get my first kind of solid experiences touring as a professional musician. Europe and Japan, a lot in the States. It was a great experience. Gary's a great teacher, as well as being, a master musician. He's very articulate and, tell us a lot about many things, politics, music, food, but the music business, really learned a lot by observing and talking to him. And he was really gracious with his wisdom. So that was a great kind of, post-school experience to really learn about the life of the musician. Yeah. And I mean, I knew obviously coming through my father, I knew what it was like for my father, but then to have that experience, internationally was really great. Yeah.
How did you know when you were ready to go out and be a touring musician?
I think the first time I was a junior, I think Gary put together a student ensemble to do a jazz cruise, and he had his professional band there with Steve Swallow and Tommy Smith, this great saxophone player who was probably still a student at the same time, and Makoto Ozone and Marty Richards on drums, who might have just graduated. I think the first time I didn't feel, I was used to playing certain kind of tunes, and his thing was really different. It was solos were shorter than what I was used to, and you didn't, so it was this, I think the playing in the student group that first year, I was probably like nervous and, whatnot. And then the second year, when it happened again, my senior year, I felt more, grounded, whatnot. So, and then an opportunity like that doesn't come up all the time. No. So, I mean, it was one of those things that you just come to and you just, a small group touring with a master musician. Man, I'm just
get ready.
Grateful for the opportunity. Just jump all the way in.
Yeah. And how long was off is that from you were doing your first album as a band leader?
In terms of my first record, I don't think that happened until I was about 30.
Okay.
So, the thing with Gary is early 20, 20, 21, 22, 23-ish, that zone. Then, I was in New York, and I moved down actually with Jeff Ballard and Larry Grenadier. We got a place together just around the Holland Tunnel, and that kind of started my New York life. And I was just basically freelancing a lot and doing a lot of different gigs. And I think on one hand, I did feel that because I'm the generation where there was the whole Young Lions thing. Yeah. So a lot of guys that I knew, a lot of guys I went to school with were part of that. Mark Whitfield, Roy Hargrove, Antonio Hart, guys got snatched up and dialed into that. And of course I felt like, oh, I would love for that to happen, to have those opportunities. There was a certain maybe pressure that I felt to get a record together. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, the story comes up. I was, Ben Porowski, great drummer, was a good friend of mine in college, and he's from New York City, and he'd moved back here. And so I got here and we were hanging out, and I was talking, I was like, man, we were at a party, and I was like, man, I really want to do a record with like Kenny Barron and Rufus Reed. I was, get myself. And he said, you know what? You ought to just take some time and just play and just soak this all in for a while. And that was great advice. Mm-hmm. He was absolutely right.
Because you hadn't thought about it like that.
I hadn't thought about that. I felt this like pressure, like mm-hmm. I got to create something. And he was like, hey, just let it all soak in for a while. And so I did. I took his advice and I just let it soak in and just kind of let things, kept working hard and just working, played in a wide variety of musical settings. And then finally an opportunity came up through, I'm forgetting, through David Baker, the engineer, who was producing and recording for Naxos. And Mike Knock, I think, was the artistic director of the jazz segment of the label. But David approached me, and I'd worked with him before and felt like the time was right. And so that ended up being Exile and Discovery, and which, they wanted standards, but I was able to do a few originals, and I was able to do some solo pieces of Astor Piazzolla's that I was really fond of. So that was the beginning of my recording career. Yeah.
Had you been writing a lot beforehand?
I was writing a bit. I wouldn't say I was prolific, and I didn't even really start writing tunes earnestly until I was at Berkeley. And even then, it wasn't I never took any composition classes or arranging classes. I was really focused on playing. But I did start writing tunes then, and then I was getting into the writing thing, and it was around that time, not too long after I first moved to New York, that I met David Binney, and who was in Lost Tribe, and with Adam Rogers and David Gilmour and Fima Efron and Ben Porowski, and I had met Adam through Ben on a spring break trip to New York when I was 18 years old. And so I used to go out and hear those guys play all the time and hang out with them. And they were writing a bunch of original music for that band. And eventually, Dave and I are both Californians and both into sports and stuff. So we kind of hit it off as friends, and we're hanging a bunch. And we started this collective group called Lan Zhang with Scott Colley and Jeff Hirschfield. And we did a lot of rehearsing and workshopping music, in fact, and tours. And then Kenny Wallison eventually came on board, a friend of mine from Santa Cruz who I grew up playing with, actually. The first gig I ever played as a 12-year-old was with Kenny Wallison. So we have a long history. So that was a workshop environment where I could really start writing specifically for individuals, and that was a big deal. And I remember prior to that, at one point, seeing Dave Liebman, who I'd known for years, and I remember saying, "Hey, man, do you have your boys?" And I thought, no, at that point I didn't. Yeah. But then when Lan Zhang happened, the answer would have been yes. Okay. This is my niche or my clique or whatever for right now. And that meant a great deal to me.
When you can have you can write for a certain group of people.
Yeah, and you kind of hear their sound because we were playing together all the time. So I could really hear the sound. I could hear the sound of the two horns and Scott and Jeff and then Kenny and just the way that they all played. And so that was really it for me.
Okay. So you got the new album coming out?
Yes.
In October.
Beyond Now.
Yes. And how have you changed, grown as a musician over the previous 11 albums?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to distill how things have changed in a way, because it's just been, I think, just kind of a natural progression for me. And I guess the one thing that comes to mind is that I just try to follow my instinct, and sometimes I'll find in a record there's a clue for what the next thing should be. Okay. Like, for example, I think this is my third recording, was called The Way Through on Arabesque, and Benny produced that, and there was a song on there, I think it's the title track, where there was this overlay of vocals and woodwinds and percussion and marimba, and I remember after that record thinking like, man, I really love how that track turned out, and that for me was the bridge to the next record I made, which was called Soar. And it was just that one song, the direction, like with voice, with more orchestrated, things happening. And I'm trying to think about the rhythmic structure of the tune. It's some odd meter thing, but that kind of coincided with the time that I got into Danilo Perez's group and really I had a real 360 in terms of, my approach to music. And what I'm getting at is that I just basically delve deeply into studying folkloric rhythms and drums and clave and stuff like that to really try to help inform my musicianship and specifically my rhythmic vocabulary. Okay. So all that was happening around the same time. So, always Benny and I discuss, before, the next record, okay, concept, things like that. His vision has been tremendous in helping shape things, and I'm just following my instinct always. Yeah. And so I guess I've, I just keep working to get better, basically, and to try to deepen my level of expression and my ability to express things. I keep working on language in which to express myself, and just looking for clarity in terms of how I do that and how I try to touch or reach a listener. And I guess that's just maybe gotten more focused over the years, and just more experience has helped me to get a clear vision about that.
So for this album, it was inspired by Bowie. What point did that become the direction?
Well, I think it was, I guess I could describe it this way, that the making Blackstar had consumed much of the first half of 2015. So in the summer, when I wrote the original music for Beyond Now, all of that music was really fresh. Okay. And that experience was really fresh in my psyche. So, so it did inform some of the writing and inspire it for sure. Especially the title track. I was like halfway through that song, and I was thinking, man, that sounds familiar. What is that? Yeah. And I realized, it's just like the intro to one of David's songs, which wasn't on Blackstar, but is actually coming out in October as part of the Lazarus cast recording. Okay, great. There's going to be 3 songs that we recorded for Blackstar with David singing. Okay. And so one of those songs is the one that inspired Beyond Now. But, there's also, in terms of the originals, Deadmau5 was a big influence. Aphex Twin, his record Cyro, and Kendrick Lamar, To Pimp a Butterfly. Those were the 3 other main things that were really inspiring me at the time. And then, so this is summer of 2015. Then, Blackstar came out in January. And then, after David passed away, we played at the Village Vanguard, which what you brought up, and in the band we were talking about what can we do to pay tribute to him, and Jason Lindner suggested we play Warsaw. So we tried it at the sound check. We played it on every set of every gig that week, and it was really great to have that tune as a way to try to express all the feelings that were happening at the time. It was really, really raw and really emotional, and a lot of grief for so many people, but myself included. And so that song was really like a way to channel that, and it was really cathartic to be able to play that. So immediately it was like, man, we got to record this. The Deadmau5 cover, Colin Canth, was from the record of his that I'd been listening to so much, and I thought would be it would be great for us to do. I thought that's something we could do something with, that tune. The other 2 covers, Mute Math Tune, Remain, and A Small Plot of Land, were both Benny suggestions. And Small Plot of Land, he and I were emailing different Bowie tunes back and forth, ideas. And that was one that he sent over from a record called Outside that I hadn't been familiar with prior to that. And just, again, listened to it and thought, yeah, I could hear us doing something with this. And it kind of went from there. I thought Dave did a great job producing the whole record as always, but that track, especially the synth string thing that he put in and the kind of electro aesthetic for that. Jason plays synth bass on it, and Tim plays wonderful, kind of as the guitar role on that tune. So happy with how that came out. So that's how it took shape. And I just felt like, again, the Blackstar thing had such a profound impact on my life creatively and stuff. And then with everything that happened, it really had been largely inspired by him. And that's why I wanted to, say that this is, inspired by him and dedicated to him and the many, many people that loved him. I mean, especially early on this year, I had the chance to interact with Bowie fans who came to our shows, and it was really, really profound to see the impact that his music had on their lives, how much they loved him. And some of them had met him and had stories of meeting him, and some hadn't. And just his reach artistically and how much they were feeling the loss. I mean, and I was dealing with my own grief at the time, and just it was nice to be in community with those people, and also just, again, profound to see the reach of his music and the impact on their lives. It was really beautiful. So I feel grateful for that opportunity.
Well, you really touched into it that night, because being in the room, you could feel like almost the spirit of that. It was very touching.
Thanks.
Thanks. So when you are going to do that album with Bowie, like when you get the call, what preparation are you thinking? I got to listen to every 30 something albums.
That's a good question. I think initially I was just immersing myself in the demos that he sent me, and at a certain point, I did think, okay, I should check out his discography more deeply, because Let's Dance was a record that I loved and knew pretty well, and what he'd done with Pat Metheny, and aware of some of the other hits, but I'd never delved deeply. So I started to, Space Oddity, Changes, whatnot, but I stopped because I thought, you know what? He's not hiring. I don't want to be too influenced by this right now, because he's hiring us to do what we do. That's why he wants us. He wants us to do what he saw us doing live, or what he's checking out on record or YouTube or whatever. So I'm just going to go all the way in on the tunes he's sending, and that's the approach I took. It's just been in the last after we finished it, and after I kind of finished my record, that I've really delved a lot deeper into his discography, which has been really wonderful. But I didn't prior to making Blackstar.
Do you have a favorite now?
Yeah, Look Back in Anger.
Okay.
Oh, do you mean the song or the
album?
Oh,
song.
Okay, I mean, Lodger or Hunky Dory.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to say right now.
Those are good ones.
Those are so great. They're so great. But yeah, specifically on Lodger, I've been really into Look Back in Anger. We've been playing it here and there on the live shows, which is really fun.
Okay, good for you. And best place people to keep up with you online?
Probably my website, which is www.DonnyMcCaslin.com. And I do some tweeting and Facebooking, and I'm going to try to step it up in the months to come.
Okay.
But with 2 young children and a busy, plate that's overflowing, it's hard to keep everything on point. But I'm doing the best I can.
Great. Well, thanks, Donny. This was wonderful.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
I wish the best with everything with the album and the tour.
Thank you.
And that was Beyond Now, the title track of the new Donny McCaslin album. It is out. Go to DonnyMcCaslin.com, as he mentioned, for more information. DonnyMcCaslin.com. And I am online at talkmusictalk.com for more information on the podcast. Or you can follow me on Instagram at thisisboyce, Boice. And don't forget the 2 things that I requested of you so kindly. Go to talkmusictalk.com to fill out the survey, which should take you under 30 seconds. And don't forget to download the app or subscribe to it on iTunes or Google Play in the podcast place. Leave a rating and or review. This is all free to you. And may I suggest episode 100? If you want to go back into the catalog, go back one show. It is my conversation with Carlos Dangler, a.k.a. Carlos D., former bassist of Interpol, talking about, in a 90-minute conversation for the first time publicly, why he left the band. The podcast was recently featured on Stereo Gum and Spin and New Musical Express. You should listen to it just like you listen to this episode. Thank you so much for checking this out. TMT, Talk Music Talk with Boys. Till next time, and there will be a next time. This one's for you, Liz.